In a Wall Street Journal article Sunday by Elizabeth Bernstein, The Science of Prayer, she talked about how the practice of prayer can boost our mental health. Apparently, a lot of us are curious about this. Google searches for prayer have skyrocketed recently, according to an analysis of search results for 95 countries. So as we've been doing, let's continue our conversation on prayer. At the most basic level, we pray because we're human. Jesus, the most human person who's ever lived, modeled this. He seemed always to be praying. Just like we need food and oxygen and sleep, we need prayer. It's like spiritual breathing. Maybe you're thinking, though, yeah, it's probably true, but I've had a really empty experience with prayer in the past. Author Sylvia Plath said, "I talk to God, but the sky is empty." This is so normal to feel this way, especially in our modern experience where we tend to expect instant responses. Something's up if that person hasn't texted me back in like seconds. But the ancient practice of prayer is different. It assumes you give yourself to it as a kind of spiritual discipline. It assumes it's cloaked in mystery and yields its return in time. So how do we go about praying? Jesus was asked that question by one of his followers and responded with what we know of as the Lord's Prayer. And he didn't intend for the Lord's Prayer to be a sterile formula, but an aid, a platform to launch us into a whole universe of prayer. So think of it as a kind of starter kit for prayer. And think about how it begins. Our Father in heaven. Well, God is the Almighty of the universe. Jesus wants us to come first to him as our Father. He addresses his Father that way himself with the Aramaic term of endearment that's closer to our daddy. And right up front, there's intimacy and love that should drive us to prayer. It was probably pretty jarring to many who heard Jesus suggest this as the starting point. Why? Because of what comes second. Hallowed be your name. Hallowed means holy, which means set apart or unique. In antiquity, a person's name referred to their character, the whole world of who they are. By saying, hallowed is your name, it's saying God is utterly distinct and perfect. He has no peer or rival. He transcends us in every way, seated in splendor beyond imagination in heaven. One of the reasons, by the way, that we tend to feel hollow in life is because I don't think we hallow his name often. We haven't set him apart in our life. We haven't filled our inner beings with him. How do we do this? Well, by filling our minds with truth about who God is as he's revealed himself in the Bible, praying it into our soul until it catches fire. Tim Keller says prayer is plunging our hearts into the fullness of who God is until we're dazzled by him. Okay, so what about the collision at the outset of the Lord's Prayer? How can we pray that God is our Father when he's also the Holy One of heaven and earth? There's a massive tension there to be sure, but see, we need to let that tension do its work. Standing in the presence of the one who is holy, it absolutely should make us want to run from God. So how is it possible then that we're supposed to run into his arms instead as our dear Father? In these first words of the Lord's Prayer, we're hit with our need for grace. And we find the answer in some of Jesus' last words, a sort of dark prayer he prayed on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Notice he doesn't address God as Father, which he always seemed to do. At that moment, the Father evidently turned his back on his perfect Son whom he loved, so he could welcome us in love as his daughters and sons. And because of this gospel miracle, we come to the Father in humble confidence without guilt or shame. Because he's showered us in love, we can plunge our heart into the fullness of who God is in his holiness. In the midst of this strain of a time that we're in, let's find our escape in prayer, coming by grace to our Father who loves us completely. And as we're dazzled by the reality of who he is, in time, through the mystery of prayer, we'll find the solace our souls seek.